Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel, The Medieval Reader. So today I'm going to do the mid-year book freakout tag. I was tagged by Crystal at BiblioAtlas. I love her channel. We are definitely booktube friends now. She's so kind. She reads the kinds of books that I'm interested in. You should definitely check out her channel. But I'm sure that you kind of already know who she is. But if you don't, definitely check out Crystal's channel. Okay. Question 1, best book this year. So that was hard. There were 3 books that I really enjoyed this year, but I have to go with Keith Harrison's translation of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. This is published in the Oxford World's Classics edition, and translators don't get enough love on BookTube. People tend to ignore the work that translators put into their translations. What makes Harrison's translation so brilliant is that the original poem contains a lot of alliteration, and he actually makes sure that in his translation he keeps the alliteration. It's produced in such a way that you're supposed to actually read it out loud. He says that in the translator's preface. So definitely whenever you get a translated work, read the preface, read the endnotes. I prefer footnotes to endnotes because it's just easier to navigate, but do notice the translator. The translator of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight was brilliant. I love the story. It was so enjoyable. I read it. I started it actually on New Year's Eve and I finished it on New Year's Day, and actually the story takes place on New Year's Day, so it was like perfect time to read, and it was completely by coincidence. I didn't realize that that's when the story took place, so I was really excited about that. Okay. Number 2, best sequel. So the best sequel was definitely Ghost at a Watchman by Harper Lee. I made a whole discussion video about it, which I will link below. 3, new releases I want to read. So there aren't a lot of new releases that I tend to read, but as far as a very popular new release that I want to read, I never really read YA. Actually, I didn't really even have a YA phase, but I've heard a lot of great things about The Hate U Give by Angie Thomas. So I would like to actually try to read a YA this year, because I do tend to ignore them, and I'm not really opposed to reading children's books. I do read them quite a lot. I have my children's book phase, but YA was just a complete age group that I just skipped over. I was really into classics when I was a young adult, as I am still, but I would like to read The Hate U Give. As far as histories, Montaigne a Life by Philippe Descent. I've actually met him in person. He's a professor at the University of Chicago, and I was visiting that school. And I'm really looking forward to reading that biography. And also Johannes Fried's new study on Charlemagne. It was published, I think, at the end of 2016, actually. But I read The Middle Ages by Fried, which I think is a wonderful introduction to the Middle Ages. He is a very well-known scholar of the period. He's now, I think, retired, but his study on Charlemagne should be very, very interesting. I think it mostly looks at how the legends, what we know of the time period in which these legends emerged, what we know about the man, and just all the different versions of the story. I think that's what it's going to be about, so I actually look forward to that. And then there is a new translation of the Song of Roland that was published this past February, translated by Simon Gaunt and Karen Pratt. And actually Karen Pratt was at a conference that I attended at the end of last year, and she was on a panel about translation, talking about the challenges translators face, and she talked about the challenges she faced translating a book that is extremely anti-Muslim, among other things, but is also a French epic, and it's very important for historical purposes. This volume includes the Song of Roland as well as 2 other stories that do not present Charlemagne in a positive light, so that kind of offsets all of the positivity about Charlemagne that exists in the Song of Roland. But she talked about other challenges, what type of English to use. So she is English, but there was an American who I think was helping her, and she was talking about the language barriers there. So that was really, really interesting. Number 4, most anticipated release. None. I just don't keep up with that. I mean, I do because I follow a lot of booktube channels, but there aren't any that I'm really excited about. 5, biggest disappointment. My biggest disappointment was Lincoln and the Bardo by George Saunders. I was expecting to be really moved and to find this book extremely cathartic because I've experienced the death of a child, not my own, but I have. And it's about the death of Willie Lincoln, who is President Abraham Lincoln's son, and they're in the Bardo, and the Bardo is this limbo-like state where the ghosts dwell around the body for a set period of time, and then they go back, I guess they go into the underworld. And the ghosts are just so obnoxious. It reminded me of the ghosts in like Nearly Headless Nick in Harry Potter or Nightmare Before Christmas. So it was kind of cute and just absurd, and it just completely took away from the scenes where Lincoln is mourning the death of his son, or there were really powerful passages from writings by his contemporaries. I think they were fictional, but it was supposed to represent contemporaries' views on the death of Willie Lincoln. And I thought those chapters were brilliant and really powerful. But then again, you'd go back to talking about these ghosts that were just vulgar and weird and just completely took away from the story. I didn't like it. So I'm a little bit nervous about reading any other hype books, but I have a few that I've bought, so I need to read them. Okay, 6, biggest surprise. The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison. I read Sula in high school, and I loathed the book. I thought it was revolting. Like, I hated the book so much. I never wanted to read another Morrison again. But then I saw a copy of The Bluest Eye at Goodwill for 25 cents. It's a charity shop. And I thought, what the heck, I'll just read it. And it was equally disturbing and dark, and there are all these characters that are so messed up. There's a father who rapes his daughter. It is just brutal. But I actually really enjoyed it, and I think maybe it's just because I'm more mature, I'm older. I would read another Morrison. It was surprising that I actually liked the book, despite how disturbing the themes are in Morrison. I feel like there's like a silence on BookTube about that. People just don't say, yeah, her books are really disturbing and messed up, and her characters are disgusting characters. And Morrison says in the Afterword that it's deliberate. Like, she deliberately makes her books this disturbing. So I'm not sure why people just avoid mentioning that. But if you don't know, Morrison's books are really disturbing, but The Bluest Eye is actually, I thought, very enjoyable. I like her writing. I would read something else by her. So, I don't know, maybe I'll try Song of Solomon in the future. 7, favorite new author to me, Marivaux. So Marivaux, I read 3 plays by him this year. He was a late 17th, early 18th century playwright of the Comédie Française, which was the French version of the Commedia dell'arte, and so he wrote slapstick comedy. I'd never really read slapstick comedy or even seen slapstick comedy before, so this was actually really enjoyable, and I loved it, his plays. So I really would like to read his novel. I think he wrote a novel, he wrote other plays. I do want to read more of Marivaux. 8, newest fictional crush. Definitely Mephistopheles from Goethe's Faust, particularly part 1, which actually I read at the end of last year, but I read part 2 in the past month, and I wanted more about Mephistopheles. I wanted way more. I thought he was just this gallant devil who's just really attractive and probably really sexy. I thought he was wonderful. I wanted more about him. That was my biggest criticism. I want more Mephistopheles. He's just great. 9, newest favorite character. So I am almost done with this extremely obscure French text. It's this epic poem from the 13th century. It's called Gerbert, and the queen in Gerbert is a badass. She is wonderful. Her husband, King Pepin, is so stupid, so lame, such a pathetic weak king, and his wife is just kick-ass. She's just wonderful. Sounds like these, and I wish these books were more popular. Like, I feel like with all the effort that this translator, Bernard Guido, put into producing this modern French translation, it's really sad that no one reads it. I feel for translators. I really do. 10. Book that made me cry. So, for some reason, I'm not crying anymore when I'm reading books, but if I actually was still able to cry while reading, The Morning They Came for Us, Dispatches from Syria by Janine Di Giovanni would definitely have to be the book. That's a very, very disturbing look at the Syrian conflict. Janine Di Giovanni is a war correspondent. I don't understand how people can become war journalists, but I am just incredibly impressed. And she interviewed a number of people, and there's torture, rape, it's horrible. But The Morning They Came for Us, I think, is a very important book for understanding the complexities of the Syrian conflict. I think a lot of countries in the West have a very black and white kind of view on this conflict, and it's much, much more complicated. And it really helped understand why Assad came to power and why people still support Assad despite everything. I didn't know that Assad came from a historically persecuted minority group, so that was really interesting. Number 11, book that made me happy. So I have 2, Gerbert, which I loved. It's so funny. I loved it. And then Harlequin poli par l'amour, Harlequin polished by love. I really, really love that play. It's slapstick comedy, like I mentioned. Harlequin is this clownish bourgeois, and he always carries a baton with him, and lots of witticisms. I love it. 12, favorite book to film adaptation. I have none, because I just don't watch many films, and there aren't many modern books that I read that would be adapted to films, so none, unfortunately. Number 13, favorite video that I've made. So my favorite video that I've made is actually a video that hasn't gotten a lot of views, but I really, really enjoyed making it. It was my recitation of Zone by Guillaume Apollinaire. I will link it below. I just woke up in the morning and felt like reciting this poem, and I do every few months. It's one of my favorite poems, and I felt that it was really relevant today. I linked in the description of that video a brilliant translation by David Lehman. You should definitely go and read the translation, because there are a lot of play on words in this poem. It's surrealist poetry, but he really captures it in the translation. Again, translators are amazing. Love the translators. 14, most beautiful book I bought. So I got a book of paintings of Hiroshige, who was a 17th century Japanese woodblock printer. I will show you some of the art. It's by Matthew Forer, and Hiroshige made a series of prints. It's called The 100 Famous Views of Edo, and Edo was the old capital of Japan. I think it was the old name of Tokyo, and in the 17th century it was this pleasure hub, and there was a lot that was going on in the city. It's where you get the geishas, and Hiroshige made a number of prints, and actually some of his prints inspired Van Gogh to actually make reprints, so his own versions. I also thought I just got my first novel by Wendell Barry, who is a Kentucky author. I got Jabba Crow. I love his poetry, so I look forward to reading other things by him. He has written so much. He's written dozens of short story he's written dozens of short stories, lots of poems, a few novels, essays. He's an environmentalist. He's just wonderful. Number 15, books I need to read by the end of the year. So the only books I actually have to read by the end of the year are books that are assigned at school. But I really would like to read the Karen Pratt and Simon Gaunt translation of Song of Roland, as I mentioned. I would like to continue with Notre Dame de Paris by Victor Hugo. I started it and I put it down and I didn't pick up it again, and I was loving it. It was wonderful, so I don't know. And then finally, Bleak House. Usually I read Dickens in the winter, but last winter I read Don Quixote by Cervantes, and after reading that whole massive book, I didn't really want to read Dickens, but I usually read Dickens in the winter, and I haven't read Bleak House. My favorite Dickens so far is Hard Times, but I haven't read Bleak House, I haven't read David Copperfield, and I haven't read Little Dorrit, which are people say they're some of his best works. So I haven't read the books that are the most acclaimed. So I'm hoping to really enjoy Bleak House, and I would like to read that this year. And probably Jabba Crow, because I do want to read a novel or short story by Wendell Barry. Okay, so that's my mid-year book freakout tag. I want to tag a few people, so I want to tag Farah at a booktube book. I just discovered her channel, but she reads classics and she reads literary fiction. She reads the kind of stuff that I get excited about. Michael at Knowledge Lost. I don't know how he doesn't have more subscribers, but it's depressing. I mean, his channel is phenomenal. Clifford at Better Than Food Book Review. He makes some great book reviews. I've also just discovered his channel, but I've been binge watching his reviews. And Brian at Brian's Book Bastion. He has made a lot of discussion videos about, the American novel, about modernism. So he does make the kind of content that gets me excited as well. So I really love his channel too. He's a newer booktuber. So let me know if you've read any of these books. Definitely check out all of the channels. I will link them below. And I hope that you have a good day. It is so nice out today. Yesterday it was really hot and the sun was over my head and I was like, ugh. But now it's really nice. I have my Mother Nurture $3 t-shirt I bought from Goodwill. Still in good condition because women's clothing used to actually be made well at one time. So anyway, I'll see you later. Bye now.